An original.
From Story Studio Network.
It is Thursday, September the 28th. Welcome in. Still 2023. Don't worry. You didn't miss much. Dave Trafford here. It is Story Studio Network, and this is our regular podcast 3 or 4 times a week. We're in your podcast app talking about the stories that kind of simmer around the edges maybe a little. But the ones that have a longer view and affect what you do, your kids do, your business does, whatever. Yeah. You're not going to get the 4-alarm fire stories here. Drive-by shootings. There are other places you can go to get that. Nope. Not going to do that. Cool time of the year, though, right? As I mentioned last couple of days, I've just made re-entry after taking some time off. We've celebrated my wife's retirement from Unity Health, which all started about 18 years ago at St. Michael's Hospital in downtown Toronto. And we took 4 weeks and just left the continent. So coming back has been a bit of a, I wouldn't say we didn't quite stick the landing. There have been a few things. Oh, I not have to do that. All of this stuff getting back into routines, right? But here we are. This is part of that routine. Welcome in. It's just been interesting to kind of watch how things have evolved as far as the news is concerned. Before we left, of course, the Greenbelt was, something of an issue. Now it's a dumpster fire that's out of control. And there's no way that anybody's going to let that go. I know the pollsters will say we're still years away from an election and we'll see. But there's a lot flying around right now that is just becoming problematic for the Ford government. Not the least of which, I'm hearing that, shock of all shocks, the Premier's not all that thrilled with the way things have gone. I heard Tim Hudak, former leader of the Progressive Conservatives here in Ontario, on the radio talking about it. Well, the Premier finally got mad and held people accountable. Yeah, maybe. I just think he got mad because he got caught. He got caught out. He wasn't paying attention. He wasn't listening. And people finally kind of cuffed him about the ears and said, hey, smarten up. And that's why he's mad. He can't blame anybody else because he didn't understand the process. So I'm really anxious to get into that conversation. Of course, tomorrow being Friday, we will relaunch, reset, fire up On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. John Wright will be here from Maru Public Opinion. Keith Leslie. You hear and see him on CHTV. And a longtime veteran reporter at Queen's Park was the bureau chief for Canadian Press for a number of years. And Sabrina Nanji will be here as well. She is the publisher and founder of the Queen's Park Observer. So there'll be lots to talk about. One of the things simmering in the background, it kind of dropped yesterday, a report from Statistics Canada showing that our population in Canada grew by 1.15 million people in 1 year. Yeah. It's one of the largest population bumps we have seen in something like 70 years. And most of it is because of migration, immigration from around the world. So it only reemphasizes the need for housing, healthcare, all of those big ticket items that governments just kind of stand around and watch. One thing I'm going to do later today, and I'm excited about this, is we're doing a project with the 2030 Project. That is the Daily Bread Food Bank folks. And we are continuing our series. So if you want to check it out, it's in your feed right now, wherever you're listening to your podcasts. And it's about the Canada Disability Benefit. And it's turning into a pretty good series. So we've launched it already. Check it out. We're going to actually have the minister responsible, the new minister, and chat to her about how soon, how fast, when, what's it going to mean. But the point of this bill, the point of this legislation is to raise those who live with disabilities out of poverty. And a significant number of people who live in poverty are disabled. It's just one of those things we kind of look past. So, all excited about that. So, by the way, yesterday we talked to Scott Clark, Aaron Trafford, about the birth of the Echo, brand new media model that we've launched. This starts in North Bay. And, the whys and the wherefores. Today, we are going to meet the team from Echo North Bay and get a sense of what they're doing, what they're feeling, and how's it all going with the Echo Community Podcast Network. When I was a kid, I used to collect hockey cards, and it was always funny because, living in Toronto, you were a Toronto Maple Leaf fan. Living in Northern Ontario, you were either a Leaf fan or a Canadiens fan, so you kind of got that split. And certainly in my family, there was this combination of French Canadians and then, the Toronto folk. And so we had this real combination of names, and I thought it was really interesting because when we were kids, my mom always talked about having cousins named Boucher, right? Of course, it was Boucher. If anybody else in there. So when we introduced our host for to North Bay with Love through the Echo Community Podcast Network, and Lisa introduced herself as Lisa Boivin, and I'm thinking, I used to have a hockey card, and the guy's name was Leo Boivin.
Oh.
Right? So I'm thinking. That was the first thing that kind of stuck in my head, and I'm thinking, get it right, Dave. Get it right, Dave. Get it right, Dave. So, Lisa, welcome in, and it's been fun to listen and see how you guys have shaped this show. You put personality into it. You brought some real characters to life. Not only you, but certainly your partner in crime there, Dave Dale, who is handling the content for the network generally in North Bay. But I don't mean this as a slight. This is way better than I thought it would be.
Thank you.
I'll take that.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah,
for sure.
No, and I say that because the number of times people will come to me and say, "Oh, I could do a podcast."
Yeah.
Probably you could.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what I loved about when you approached this, you approached it from a place of curiosity and wanting to learn new things.
Yeah.
And that kind of, I think, set us on the right path here. And it just feels right.
Yeah, it does. And it's funny it's funny about my name. At the launch, poor Scott is not French. And he kept saying, and we have Lisa Boivin here. Lisa Boivin. And I could see my mom in the back, good old Sal going, "Oh, for God's sake, Lisa, that is not how your last name is pronounced. You're going to have to tell Scott that." And I was like, Mom, Sal, he's not French. It's okay. Anyway, but it is, it's a hard name.
Well, it's not hard. It's we Anglophones kind of get tripping over our tongues and we're stupid that way.
Yeah, those vowels those sounds are not in the English language. So it's kind of, I've gotten all kinds of it over the years. When you said it just came naturally, or it just seemed right. When Scott called out of the blue, I hadn't chatted with him in a long time. And he called and said, "Hey, we have this project going on, give me a call." And I thought, okay. So I called him and we had this conversation. And when he said what it was, he said, "Yeah, so we're going to start a podcast. And, we wondered if you'd come in and host." And it was just an immediate, yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. When? What day? What time? It wasn't, it was just kind of like a natural. I thought this is the next thing in life. This is it, and just kind of jumped in. And I think if you approach anything with curiosity, that's the best way to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You Because then you just learn. Then you can ask all of these questions and not feel afraid to ask questions. I think people kind of get bogged down with that. And maybe, I know it's because I'm of a certain age at this point, Dave, which I won't say what it is. But, if I was doing this in my 20s or 30s.
I probably have T-shirts older than you, so settle down.
I think if I was doing this when I was 20s and 30s, it would be a different thing, right? But, now I'm at the point where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing half the time. Or what about this? Or what about that? Or, so you're just, the more you ask, the more you're going to figure it out, right?
I think you're right, because there comes this point where my wife's biggest burden is that I am not easily embarrassed. So I'm not afraid to make the comment out loud, ask the question that might otherwise seem silly or stupid. And I think the beauty of it is that we so often take for granted what is the obvious. And I know you'll find that in your journalism, Dave. I mean, just if you don't ask to clarify the obvious, you kind of gloss over a lot of things in the telling of a story, right?
Yep, for sure. Yeah. It's been really cool. It's the timing of it all for everybody involved, like in all their lives. It's like the timing of this type of project is, I think, what is going to lead to perfection is. Because everybody was ready for it and wanting something like this. And so we're open to the newness and the excitement. It's like a chance to start something fresh, new. Yeah,
and I mean, listen to the interview that you did yesterday. You had Scott Clark on yesterday and talking with you and Aaron. And, I didn't know a lot about the radio stations you guys were talking about and stuff like that because my background isn't radio, but, there is a need, right? He was saying there truly is a need for these voices to be heard and to give local voices a place to kind of tell their stories. And the amount of absolutely incredible, interesting stories that are right here in North Bay, like, blow my mind. Like, if I can quickly just give an example, last night I went to Von Doler Ranch and I took some lessons out there, kind of in the past. And then I went out yesterday. My friend was taking a lesson and their story is insane. So Mr. and Mrs. Von Doler from Germany came over in 1912. This ranch was established in North Bay. They were supposed to get on the Titanic, but they were denied. They were denied to get on the boat because of their dog. They had a dog and they had to pay passage for this dog and they didn't have the money. So they said, okay, we'll take the next boat. And so they ended up taking the President Lincoln, took the boat, even heard distress calls from the Titanic, but they were too far to help or anything. Anyways, after this journey, they made it to North Bay, and they're now a fourth generational ranch. And their story's insane. I'm like, this is right here in North Bay. Like, we got to get this. So last night, and this is who I've become now. Everywhere I go now, I was like, oh, Alana, oh, just 1 second. Can you come here for a sec? So listen, we have a podcast going on. Here's the address. Go check it out. Subscribe to the newsletter. But listen, why don't you come on and tell everybody this amazing story? Because, like, there's all these little gems everywhere you go, right? That you're just like, what? Like, they came over from Germany. Anyways, it's just, it's pretty awesome.
Well, and I will argue with the C-suite in this regard as far as the Echo is concerned, because I know, we're being very careful about being collaborative and involving other media, and I love that we're doing that. And we got into that conversation yesterday with Scott in terms of how necessary it is for the media generally to be able to stand each other up in to some degree, and that's what's happening in the newsletter, Dave, for example. I mean, you're talking about your own perspective and your own reporting on stories, but there are other things that are going on in North Bay, and there are other media that you're relying on, and I think that's kind of a cool thing. But Aaron and Scott being careful. Well, the podcast really isn't news. You know what? That's kind of how I used to do the morning show in Toronto. It was that kind of story that resonated with people. That's what, it would be great to, if we could get away from a newscast that only relied on leads that, involved car crashes and, bar brawls. I mean, and that's okay. But I think the story that that sliding door kind of feel to the whole thing. Holy cow, what would have happened if you got on that ship? The story goes away. But even, in the newsletter, I guess it was yesterday that, you were talking about the Speaker of the House story, Dave. And the idea, we brought it up yesterday. There was no real on-the-ground storytelling around that in North Bay that I could find. Now, maybe I really had to dig deeper, but I took a couple hours to sort of find it. And it was a wire story. For those of you listening, that's just copy that's driven by a wire service. And there were some bio details at the end of that story about Anthony Rhoda, but you put a local reaction to it, and you put me in the story that I wouldn't have otherwise seen. So I think that that's what's vital here in terms of this sort of two-punch effect with the podcast and the newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems to be working. I have some friends in the business here, and it's their eyebrows are going up, and like they're seeing something different and a different approach to something. And it's I was just talking to one of our Tristan, who works the graphics here and some other stuff, and he was saying that he's finding it to be useful because it provides something that he's not getting elsewhere, and it seems to be a sort of a pivot point of community information, and combining with the podcast. And we don't just use it to promote the podcast that we do, so it's more than that. It's more than just a promotional piece, right, or a linchpin to what we're doing. So that's how he's finding real value to it, and that's what I'm trying to get. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's, again, I go back to missing the obvious. That's an obvious thing to do in any market, any community. The idea that you want to be where your audience is. Mm-hmm. And so, here we are. It was 2 weeks ago today. You guys, stood up and yeah, wow. It's been 2 weeks. So
yeah, we've done 7 newsletters in 14 days. And today's drop of your show is it the 6th? Number 6? Yeah. So saying yes. That's amazing in 2 weeks. Really.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. And I think the idea that we're able to not only sustain that, but it feels, like I said off the top, it always feels fresh. And so, the idea that you're bringing these characters to life, but it's somebody that you're going to meet in the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
That's the cool part about it. And there's nothing really special about it, except that they have a unique story to tell, and you're able to kind of elevate that and amplify it. And I said this, I think, in an email to you. I think we got to get your mother on the show.
Oh, man. Yeah, Sal's got to get on here. Yeah, she's a character, man. She's a character. Although you should have seen, that we were kind of talking about this, right? Because that's kind of maybe the next thing is to kind of tap into that, the generations who maybe are having trouble kind of finding us, or how do we find a pod? And it was funny. Yeah. I mean, because Sal's pretty savvy, like she is. I mean, she's pretty good. Technology, maybe not so much. She is very scared of her computer. Any button at any point can explode it. And, but her first thing was, well, like, so Lisa, how do I hear this? Like, where do I go? How do I get a hold of this? And I said, well, you're just going to Google it. You just Google northbayecho.ca. Well, yeah, but then what? Like, do I have to press something? Do I have to download something? Like, they don't, and all great questions, because if you're not used to doing this, like, certain generations are boom, they just get on a podcast. They know how to do it. They know how to find it. But she wouldn't know how to, even if she had to go to the app store and get a podcast app, she wouldn't know how to do that. So, yeah, she's got some really good stories between her neighborhood watch and her Raptors and Jays insanity. She's she's a big sports fan. Huge.
Oh, is that right? So it's
huge.
a big part of the year right now for her.
And the Raptors, they're all. I mean, I think it's just Pascal Siakam who's left, and she's a little heartbroken. Van Vliet left, and I don't know. Anyway, so it's gonna be a year. She might have to get some timeouts, but
yeah. Well, but it, again, the beauty of it is, and I think you've kind of touched on the right point here. The content is the hard part. Making sure it's discovered is the next step, right? Yeah. And I think, as long as, whether it's your mom or anybody else, we're fulfilling an expectation for them. And maybe that is just piqued my curiosity today. Mm-hmm. So I think there's something really kind of eye contact about what you guys are doing. So first, thanks for stepping up and doing it and being brave enough to kind of get us to the edge of this thing, because I think it's a great model. It's a great piece for us to be able to showcase and no offense, but this could have gone sideways in a hurry.
And we're done with that. Thank you. Thank
Exactly.
you. That was a good podcast, guys. What's
Swing and a
next?
miss.
Yeah.
Swing and a miss.
Yeah,
We'll just
right.
put that to
Yeah.
bed. All right.
Well, and you use the word, I think, Dave, you used, looking for perfection. And Aaron and I stress on our team, there's no perfect in podcasting. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Right. It's really kind of here, it's in the moment, and what we're trying to do anyway.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, we've done some highly produced pieces and everything else, and that's a different thing. But it's a different feel to the whole thing. I want to kind of get your, besides your mom's reaction, when you are saying come on the podcast, what's you getting eyebrows raised, or
yeah, it's an immediate yes. Like I have to this
okay.
point, I have had nobody say like, oh, I don't. First of all, I mean, most people, know what it is, right? They know what a podcast is at this point, but even just to come on and it's weird because I come up from a performance background, and so kind of going up talking in front of people or doing these kind of things, it comes naturally to me, and so I'm very surprised because I'll go and ask these people, and immediately they're like, yeah, oh my God, that'd be great. Okay, time and place. Like, I'm there. I'll come and talk. And I'm like, really? Like, you wouldn't be shy to do this? This is, and there's been some podcasts where, I mean, Ben and I are like, and Ben's our producer, and we're sitting here and I'm, he's kind of waving the little pen around, kind of going like, wrap it up, but we could sit here and talk for hours. Like, these people just, they're amazing, these stories, and they just tell, like, I don't know, we just kind of go down the rabbit hole sometimes, but no, the reaction's been great. Like, people just are jumping to get on, which is awesome, which is a really nice thing to have,
Yeah, absolutely. And not at the risk of picking a scab, the whole notion that this came out of more or less a moribund state of local media, not just in North Bay, but we're seeing that great across the country. Dave, I'm just curious to get your sense of where the echo model fits into the ecosystem as far as the local media in North Bay is concerned.
I think they're watching intently to see if it disrupts their particular focus and direction, right? They're not sure how they fit into it. They're not sure how to look at us as competitors or friends or what's really going on. So it seems to me that from the feedback I got is that they wanted something to come in and be fresh and invigorate them. And I remember with the Nugget when I was there, we thought competition was better for us, right? It drove us in the newsroom, right? And when there was a one period where we didn't have any competition at all, everybody was, and it reduced our effort, right? We didn't have to work as hard. And so I can see that some of the guys are actually putting a little bit more effort in, it seems. Maybe it's just me, but they're actually trying a little harder, thinking about little things, thinking about maybe covering high school sports is a good idea after we said we're going to do a high school sports podcast, and they see the value of it. It's just, it energizes everybody when somebody else comes into the ecosystem, I guess.
Yeah, and we were talking about this yesterday, and Scott brought up the point that it's important to be able to support the culture and the actual sector, and that is important. But I said back in the day when I was working at Hamilton, we had probably 15 people working in an AM radio station newsroom that played top 40 music. So, and we had 2 sports guys, and we did a sports show and all this stuff. And we were highly hammer and tong competitive. When you went out in the street, you wanted to make sure you got your question in the scrum, and it was a fight. And as soon as you take that out of that, I think you're right, Dave. I think you kind of lose some, you get a little flabby, complacent, whatever the word you want to use. And it's funny, the stories you're telling, Lisa, would just get spiked. They wouldn't even make an assignment meeting.
Wow.
In most cases. And I think there was the problem, right? In some respects, because that is there's the life of the community. You guys are reflecting the community back to me. And here's a guy in, beautiful downtown Don Mills in Ontario, and I'm engaged in what's going on because of that level of that kind of discourse that you're bringing. So here's hoping that if we do nothing else with this project, is that you kind of reinvigorate some of that journalistic and competitive spirit that, is so sorely needed. Because, as great as you guys are doing it, I don't think you can do it all.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
No, that's
Yeah.
great.
Well, that is the thing, and it gets expressed in the newsletter, is that there are other things. Their jobs are to do the news a certain way, and that relieves that role from me. I can look at it more of an analytical approach, because they're doing the homework and doing the original stories that they're supposed to be doing and trying to get that done first. So that allows me to sort of approach it in a different way.
Yeah, there's a curation part of what that newsletter does too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Being able to say this is kind of reflected here. And I know I follow Sabrina Nanji. She has the Queen's Park Observer newsletter out of the legislature, and that's what she's there to cover. She'll break a lot of stories and do some reporting on that specifically. But to your point, CTV had this really great story about, boom, find it here. The Toronto Star is doing it. So that level of discourse and that culture and recognition of the good work that's going on around you, I think, is really kind of important. So, tell me, you referenced the idea of, let's do a high school sports show. I know there are other shows that were announced and standing up. I want to dip into, I haven't done it yet. I want to dip into the Backroads with Bill piece, because it just sounds like it's one of those things I need to do.
I guess I can talk about it because, I do it with Bill there.
Okay.
I know we're both like,
Who did he throw that to?
Yeah, no,
Well, you'll notice in the way I do a podcast or I do interviews, I rarely ask a question. So
you just kind of let it
I'm just going to let it kind of sit there.
Grab on.
There,
Yep.
that's right.
That's right.
There you
Somebody
go.
grab it.
Yeah, Bill.
But I'm anxious to dip into the Backroads with Bill. Is his latest episode something referencing the Edmund Fitzgerald?
Yeah,
that I read in
Fitzgerald.
here?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So he's talking about. So me and Bill do it. So he's a guy who's been around a long time, telling stories on CBC Radio, I know through Village Media. He does a lot of his stories. So we're basically retelling a lot of his stories that he's already told or done articles on, but we're retelling it with a lot more detail. Kind of going into it. It's both audio and video, so we have some visuals, trying to get people to go out there, and it's kind of a combination of history and what he knows, like everything about, like pretty much anything outdoors or historical. It's insane how much he knows. So it's a combination of history of going out to certain places, mostly in Northern Ontario, and it's just all these interesting stories. And what I've noticed out of doing these with him is I know nothing about Northern Ontario, because he'll be like, hey, have you ever heard about these like ferries, like that you go across on your car? It's like, nope, never heard of that before. Or these like Windex lakes that look like you're right out of the Caribbean. It's kind of crazy. I've learned so much from him.
Yeah. And that's the kind of thing, and I think it kind of lends itself to where we started here. The curiosity, you pique the curiosity. We're telling stories that you're not necessarily going to find, above the fold on any other of the media outlets, and certainly not the Toronto or the national media. So listen, this is fun, watching with interest, and glad that we're able to partner not only with you guys in North Bay, but to be able to, we're proud to say, wow, look at this show. This is really doing well. Subscribe to the newsletter, and get out there and I say this, it's about North Bay, but it really is about great storytelling in the community. So northbayecho.ca. So Ben Sargent is our producer in North Bay. Lisa Boivin is our host of To North Bay with Love, and Dave Dale is the editor of the newsletter and is also our content director. Listen, this has been fun. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you get a pretty good idea of the chemistry there, right? Dave Dale is the veteran journalist, spent a lot of time in Northern Ontario and North Bay, worked for the Nugget, as he said. And then Lisa Boivin is an actor. She's a performer. And you hear that in her storytelling. So, and then we've got Ben, who is the producer up there, and he's doing great work. And he's learning how to be a podcast producer. And he's doing a damn good job at it. So I've been taking notes in terms of what he's doing and what we're all doing. So it's all good fun. So just a reminder, again, if you want to check it out, feel free. northbayecho.ca, and you'll see to North Bay with Love is right there on the front page. But you can check out the other shows. Yeah, I do want to listen to the Backroads Bill podcast, and that'll be kind of fun. So I think that might be some of my tuning over the weekend. All right, that'll do it for us. This is Now and Next for Story Studio Network. And reminder, tomorrow in your feed will be On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Now and Next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner. And our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Our executive producers are Dave and Aaron Trafford.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.